think it's fair to say in any FPS that our main concern is the position of other players. And to figure out their position, we can make a few different kinds of observations. When there's a match between our knowledge and observations, we can use that to make predictions. And it's this process of making observations and predictions which allows us to get the upper hand and outposition the other players. I'm going to divide the types of observations that we can make into 3 different basic types, and defining them this way will make more sense in other videos down the track. And first is direct observation, most obvious one, which quite literally means directly seeing them, seeing their position. Second is a previous or past observation, where you might have observed something directly in front of you, but you can't see them anymore. For example, you've spotted a player and they've moved back behind some cover. And the fact that it happened in the past means that you have to deal with it differently, because things could have changed since you last saw them. They can use your own assumptions against you. The third type is an indirect observation, for example, hearing footsteps. It's incomplete information. It's not direct. It can be unreliable and misleading, but it's essential to pick up on as much indirect evidence as possible to gain an advantage. So how does all this relate to something like pre-aim and pre-firing? Well, let's just go through a few really simple examples, the kind of things that might happen every time you play. Here I enter this room and see a friendly player hit the ground. Now, I didn't see the player who shot him, but I can assume that he's been shot by an enemy player, and they'd need to have line of sight on that spot where he fell. And I heard the shots which sounded close, so I can infer that they should be right there. They should be very close by. These are all indirect observations. I haven't seen the enemy player, but I've got a good enough idea of where they are to act on it. So now I have this small advantage because I know something about them that they don't know about me. I don't really want to move any closer to that spot though, because I have an open door to my left, which hasn't been cleared. I don't really know what's out there, and if I walk past, someone might blindside me. So I stop short of the door and I cover it as I'm watching the tanks. So they're somewhere behind these tanks. They could appear to the left or right side of the tanks, and I check back and forth a few times, but I settle more on the left side. That's because I've noticed that many people tend to move toward the direction of the kill that they've just made, pushing forward, stepping over the body, and sort of following the momentum of where the action is happening. So I pre-aim, I get my sights on the spot where I expect that player to appear. And I'm not aiming right up against the tank, which is the very earliest point that I'm going to see him come out. I expect him to probably move into the room a little bit more to my left there. So I'm taking my own minimum reaction time into account, giving myself enough distance to have that quarter-second reaction time here.
We took Charlie! Great!
We got Alpha! We got it!
Now for that third one, I actually heard the footsteps before I saw him, so I was able to mentally prepare for someone to come in. Although I was aiming to the far corner in case someone stops there. So when they did enter, I had to adjust and pull pretty far to the right. And here's another indirect observation. I can hear someone running behind me.
Enemy just got their feet!
Insurgency has these game modes where you need to sit on a very small area and objective and hold it for a certain amount of time in a lot of the game modes. So I'm sitting in there and I know that the other players are going to need to push in. I've got my aim ready at their entry point, and as they're coming in I get the drop and I get off the X by moving laterally to the right, but I continue pushing too far to the right and I expose myself to that long angle that was never cleared before. And luckily that player's distracted with something and I can pull back in without getting shot, because he would have had me, he should have had me. So I get ready again, and now I have this past observation. I can't see him right now, but I'm very confident that he's going to come through very soon. I see the muzzle of his gun present through that door, and then he backs up again, so I assume he's going to be there, and I pre-fire. How exactly does pre-fire work? Think back to the reaction loops we covered in the last video. Observe, decide, act. With pre-fire, you're going to rely on indirect or past observation, or maybe even use pattern recognition alone and nothing else. You're then going to make a prediction based on that evidence. The point is, when you're deciding what you're going to do, you can't directly see the opponent and they can't see you. You're processing 2/3 of your reaction loop before they are even visible. By the time you're acting, they're just getting started at the observation stage. This also means that you have a high risk of friendly fire because you're not waiting until you've visually processed what you're shooting at. At this point, you're just going through the physical motions of what you've already decided to do. So here's a better example of pre-fire, and this time I'm fighting it out one-on-one with the last player in a round. I kick that door in and I don't want to re-peek it because that would just put me back on the X. So I throw a smoke grenade just to increase his cognitive load, maybe confuse him a bit, and I try to flank him. He's moved back, repositioned. I see him go through that door and I miss. I'm expecting he's probably going to be waiting there for movement at that door. If I was going to go and expose myself to that entire room and scan the whole thing to find my target, he would have an advantage in reaction time. I don't know exactly where he's going to be, so I pre-fire in an arc as I break that doorway. And when I hit him, I was actually confused for a very short moment when the screen for the end of the round came up. It took me a moment to realise that I'd killed him because the entire action was preemptive.